So first of all, I have to say sorry a little bit because I wrote through this kind of fast and I didn't really get time to prepare it, so I'll kind of be reading from my sheet.
You should
So if
say
you
your
don't-
name.
Huh?
You should say your name.
My name's Sunny. Nice to meet you, whoever you are.
And the title of your presentation.
All right. The title of my presentation is Applying Leadership Theories in My Romantic Pursuits. So I can't wait to tell you all about my first-hand experiences in applying leadership theories in my romantic pursuits. From great man to situational, each has its pros and cons, and I can think of nothing more worthwhile than to recount my results from applying each theory to you all. I was so excited to give this presentation until not too long ago, my mom told me a story about my younger cousin, and I decided to change my topic to something also very close to me, which is mental illness. 1 in 4 Americans have suffered from a mental illness. I hope I don't need to count the number of people in this room to tell you that that's a big deal, because that's a big deal. It spans a huge amount of conditions and issues that could and should be talked about for hours on end, from anxiety to depression to autism and so much more. I wouldn't know where to begin. If, of course, I hadn't already made the presentation, which kind of dictates where we're going to start, and the lucky winner is depression. Now, you've all seen and learned about depression, but let me ask you a question. Do you know what depression is? Does anyone think they have a good grasp on what it is? Not necessarily from first-hand experience, but knowledge. You can raise your hand. Sarah?
Depression is the feeling of hopelessness or sadness over a long or an extended period of time.
Does anyone know about the actual effects on your body? Okay. Well, it actually has very real biological, chemical results on your body, mainly a chemical imbalance in your brain. And I could talk for a while about all of the scientific effects of it. However, because it is very real and very physical occurrence in your body. But I have another question which is a little more pertinent to what I'm going to be talking about. And that's if you know what depression feels like. Now, I'll try my best to answer this one, I guess. Depression feels kind of like a 1,000-pound weight. And it's holding your body down in a pool of water, barely reaching your chin. So no matter how bad your neck hurts, you gotta keep your head up to survive. It's looking at the sky, seeing how far away heaven is from you right now. It's how much you hate now, and every second after it. It's the feeling after you realize that that one thing that you want so passionately is drifting past your fingertips, and each time you reach to grab it, you get a mouthful of water, and you sacrifice drowning. Depression is the pressure bouncing against your chest, asthmatic. Air keeps seeping in even though I don't want to breathe again. Depression is finally falling asleep and waking up so pissed off for no apparent reason in the morning. It's a constant state of mourning when the only thing that died is your pride. It's pushing everybody that loves you as far away from you as humanly possible because I don't deserve them. Desert them before they desert me. It's quicksand sinking. It's feeling alone in a room full of people. It's all right. Yeah, I'm okay. No, really. I'm good. It's applying a clown face and pretending everything is cool and content when you know you will explode any minute. It's tears that will never fall from your cheek, fear of adding to the water that I'm already chin deep in. Depression is feeling like the biggest clown in the smallest circus, worthless. When will my best be good enough anyway? It's being afraid of being alone with your own thoughts in an empty room, but not wanting anyone around you. It's going to the bathroom in total darkness, not wanting to see your own reflection. It's taking 5 showers a day at least and still not feeling clean. Depression is the reason I stayed in bed today, and yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that. I can get 100 hours of sleep and still feel tired as hell. Searching for a clear definition of self, it's biting your nails till your fingers bleed, steadily grinding your teeth. It's the thanks for nothing look you give the people who tell you to pray and everything will be okay, but the only explanation is crazy. But you wouldn't call me crazy if you knew how much I hate me. Depression is the reason this poem has no ending. And I want to hope that none of you know what depression feels like, but I know it's a lie because we are creatures of empathy. Note I say creatures for a reason, because the term people can be too easily misinterpreted to mean a collaborative entity. And I can lie to myself, but I won't lie to you and say we are a people of empathy. Not today, I won't. Not while living in a society that needs to see it to believe it, that needs either a thermometer or an x-ray to know that something's not quite right. Not while there's only 2 home remedies to depression, for girls to perk up and for guys to grow a pair. Not today, I won't. The term a people exists because every whole is nothing more than the sum of all of its parts. And we are our parts, you and I. So I say let's start there. Now for all of you working on raising mental health awareness, I'm incredibly thankful. You don't know how thankful I am. And you have every right to say you're one step ahead of me. But I'm sorry to say I'm 10 steps behind, so where does that leave you? I hate to be harsh, but awareness is only the first step. And the stride of your step can make Neil Armstrong gawk in respect. But a step's still a step and one's not enough. Don't get me wrong, the main point of the week is to bring long overdue attention to an issue that has an undeniable presence. However, the events of this week absolutely cannot be mistaken as a solution to the problem. Rather, think of it as a spark for discussions between students and adults. It is inevitable that IMSA makes changes in order to accommodate for the mental well-being of its students. We need to bring up these issues now in order to prompt communication so IMSA makes the right changes. A friend told me once that she was afraid to tell people about the mental issues she was experiencing because she was afraid of the way they would react. She was legitimately afraid that the school would deem her unfit for success at IMSA and force her to leave the one place that she loves to be at, the one place that she believes she can she has her potential to get better, like a puppy that kept on walking with a broken leg, holding back a whimper in fear of being put down. The analogy may seem extreme, but the emotions are as sincere as possible. I don't want to say that anyone at IMSA is not supportive of those struggling with mental illness, but the fear is still very real. It is not a fault of any member on our campus. We simply suffer from something that extends far past our IMSA bubble. Contrary to popular belief, our campus is not sick. Fatigue, apathy, anxiety. We are merely experiencing the symptoms of a disease which plagues much more than our bubble. And to make the symptoms go away for good, you have to target the root cause. They say that ignorance is bliss, and it may seem that way sometimes, but I would hope that you all realize how wrong this is. Ignorance is nothing less than giving up. And sometimes it seems like that's what our nation has done. We've shoved it under the bed so that we can pass room inspects while it manifests in the dark. If we raise awareness about mental health, that's great. People might start to consider the possibility of experiencing mental illness before it begins. But what's the use of that if our government and health system don't have the ability or intent to help those for whom mental illness has not yet begun to manifest? Have you ever thought about why the doctor gives you a periodic checkup? The doctor seems to check every part of your head to make sure it's working properly, except for what I would consider the most important organ, the one inside your head. You would think there's no reason to prepare for mental illness until after it hits you. Not only is this preventing us from limiting the effects of mental illness and overall improving everyone's mental health, it is creating a false mindset in society. That mental illness is something which will only hit some people for whom it is inevitable, which is very far from the truth. In schools, they make sure everyone's had their shots for this and that, but rarely are children tested for mental illness, and only when absolutely necessary. The first person who will realize that they need help with mental illness is obviously that person, him or herself. But if we don't even teach children how to perceive those symptoms and what to do about it, how can we expect to help them? If you don't feel overwhelmed yet, you can believe it's worse in other countries. I said that I gave this talk because of a story my mom told me about my younger cousin, so I guess I'll explain the story. This is a picture of my younger cousin. He's the third one from the left next to my dad and my uncle. The picture was taken 3 years ago, which is about the last time that I visited him. And unfortunately, or fortunately, he lives in India with his parents and my grandma, and as such, I don't get to visit him very often. But I do remember the time that I spent with him rather vividly. While his autism prevented him from ever passing 3rd grade, he still was one of the sweetest kids I've ever known. He seemed to love everyone around him. In fact, he had this thing about him where he used to always touch people who got nearby him. And we would tell him, no, that's wrong. You can't touch people like that. It's inappropriate. And whenever we caught him doing it, he would kind of look up and go, no touch? And we'd be like, no touch. And then he would back off for another 5 minutes. He also has a lot of funny interests. For example, he was really obsessed with planes. So whenever we got off the plane, he'd be like, oh, you're from O'Hare? And we're like, yeah, O'Hare. And he's like, did you know the pilot? And I'm like, yeah, I talked to the pilot. He's like, good pilot? Yeah, good pilot. He also loved water parks. He would always talk about all of the different water parks in India that he wanted to go to and how much all the fishes that would be there. And so one day we actually took him to a water park, and then he wouldn't swim. He just kind of was real happy on the sidelines. And then we're like, go in the water, go swim. We paid for you to get a ticket. And then he's like, oh no, pani gandoai, which in our language means the water is dirty. Like, okay. Finally, we're like, okay, no, you're gonna enjoy this. We're gonna put you on like a little tube and you're gonna go down the slide, nothing's gonna happen. He goes down the slide, halfway through, he falls out of the tube and he's stuck. And so finally they get some authorities to go get him and he's all upset and we're like, all right, we won't come to water parks anymore, and then he's more upset. Another thing, you never like to exercise. You can see he's a little bit of a big guy. But I got him to play cricket with like me and his neighbors a couple times. If in exchange, we would give him food. Because he could honestly eat anything, and more than that, he was like an excellent chef in there. Like, and whenever the food wasn't quite good, he'd be like, you need to put a little more of this spice in there, and then it'd be better, and then he would eat it all. Unfortunately, sometimes his mental illness put a damper on vacation. The first time I could remember going to India, I actually really hurt their family. I couldn't understand, I was a lot younger, and I couldn't understand what was different about the way that he learned from the way like me and my sister learned. And so a couple times, like throughout the week, he figured out, then when he pressed a certain switch on my Game Boy, it would turn it off. And like at the time I was playing Pokemon, so that's a really big deal. Because if you turn it off, you can't save the game, and then you have to start over from the beginning, so I would get furious. And so one time I caught a really cool Pokemon, I was getting excited, and then he's like, oh, I'll turn off your game. And so I actually started crying. And later, my aunt told my cousin Chirag to go to his room, and like she talked to her for a bit. And in the meantime, like the rest of my family and his family had a conversation. And I said some things that I really shouldn't have. I said, like, why can't he just understand when I tell him no? Why is he so dumb? And I didn't realize it at the time, but he was only turning off my Game Boy because he wanted to play with me and spend time with me. And I didn't even think about that. And more so than anything, the more I complained, the more I would hurt my aunt, his mom. And like my parents would told me like a couple years later that like some of the things I said, it causes her to like stay up with Chirag and cry and be sad about it. And I really didn't feel like I deserved their compassion for letting me stay there for that month that I would stay with them. The next day, Chirag was still, of course, looking forward to playing with me. And when he found out at the end of summer that I was going back to O'Hare, back on the plane, he was actually the only one crying, to lose his friend that had only talked bad about him behind his back. So I haven't actually been there in a few years, but recently my parents went there for a wedding for a few weeks. And when they returned, I was eager to ask them how everyone's doing. Yeah, everyone's doing well. Specifically, how's Chirag doing? And then things got kind of awkward. We were in the car, and my mom was just, my dad looked actually kind of angry, and my mom was just like not saying anything for a while, and then she said that he was only getting worse. So I dropped the subject, and a couple weeks later, it seemed like my mom was having a bad day. She came into my room where me and my sister were about to go to sleep. And then she starts talking to us about like what actually happened over there with Chirag. And apparently she did get a lot worse. That he grew to be taller than anyone in that picture. I'd say about maybe a little taller than the guy in the middle, and about 200 pounds because he just kept eating and he never exercised. And worst of all, his brain led him to be only more animalistic. My mom herself, someone who I think is one of the nicest people I know, called him nothing more than a beast. He wouldn't talk to his parents respectfully, let alone respectfully, he would hit them, and like he was a strong guy. Whenever he wouldn't get the food that he wanted to eat, he would slap my aunt hard enough that she would actually like bruise, and they didn't know what to do about it. She said that the caring Chirag that I knew was no longer existent. And possibly worst of all was the way she treated my grandma, because my grandma was probably by far one of the smartest people in the family, and she had a little better understanding of what was wrong with Chirag than the rest of the family did. And so throughout she would be a little tougher on him because she really wanted him to get better. And as such, this grew to Chirag kind of detesting her. By the time like his condition deteriorated, he got really, really violent about it, and they couldn't be in the same room. Whenever and they live in like a 2-bedroom apartment, so whenever Grandma would walk in the same room as Chirag would get all fisted up and upset, and she'd be like, tell Grandma to leave, I'll hit her, I'll kill her. And it was really a problem that they couldn't avoid. So eventually they took him to the doctor, and this is another big issue, is that whenever Chirag's around people who aren't his immediate family, his personality changes. He becomes a sweet, caring person that I thought I knew. And because of that, none of the doctors could really diagnose him properly. Even when my parents went there initially, they would be all cute. He would be all cute and cuddly with them, like just completely a different person. And so even with this knowledge that they have of him, they were unable to really help him because they couldn't give him the right medicine, they couldn't have the right resources, and as such in India, this isn't like the kind of thing that they're really used to treating. I think one of the most drastic things I've ever heard was a suggestion to just leave him at the train station and let life take its course. But obviously they can't do that. That he's his kid. No matter what, even if he's bringing my aunt and uncle closer to their death, it's still their kid. They can't do that. In the 17 years I've been alive, I've never experienced an emotion as strongly as I have that of helplessness. I didn't know what to do. He can't come to America and get treatment. They obviously don't have the money or resources in India, and the result is I'm losing one of my best friends. While even America is relatively ignorant of mental illnesses, it's so much worse for the majority of the world's population. That's why no matter how much progress we make on our campus, my remorse won't really go away. The worst part is that this is the part of the presentation where I finally admit that I don't have any answers. That feeling of helplessness hasn't gone away. Nevertheless, I urge you to keep in mind the bigger picture. Whether it's through writing bills or creating social ventures or anything else, the issue of mental illness plagues more people than you may realize. For those of you who are upset that I've done nothing but raise a bunch of obvious questions and issues without providing any solutions, I am sorry about that. I do have some advice for you all, however. I'll tell you everything I've learned about how we can begin to improve mental health for the rest of the presentation. To do so, we'll actually need to go back to my first slide. Here we go, lots of animations. Applying leadership theories in my romantic pursuits. So what can we learn from my romantic pursuits? I began with this slide for a reason. The lesson that I've learned from my attempts while pursuing someone romantically, thirsting if you will, is that you have to keep having fun. Because if the chase itself isn't enjoyable, then reaching a satisfying goal is impossible. In the same way, you can't heal the world without starting with yourself. Have fun along the way. If you let the symptoms of the very disease you combat stand in your way, you'll never get past it. So stay optimistic, be happy, and always have good faith. I don't know each of your lives, and I can't say that anyone else is worse off than you, but I know each of you well enough to say you have the ability to keep smiling. No matter what the situation is, you can always find something to laugh at. I don't even care if it's at my futile endeavors. No matter how inappropriate or serious the circumstances, you can always squeeze in a couple of jokes. We've all passed around the phrase that you can change the world if you just change one person's perspective of it. So my call of action is to start with your own. Life may seem grim at times, that's because it is. Luckily, we're all strong people with an even stronger support system. I strongly and sincerely believe that each of you has the power to stay positive. Start out by doing it for you, and soon you'll realize that I'm giving this presentation because I need you to do it for me. And for so many others. Like I said, we may be 10 steps behind, but if we take it one step at a time, we have to get there eventually. Thank you.